You shouldn't be out here alone. Come inside. And GT, thank you. And GT. Nobody told Marcus Webb that the shivering creature behind his dumpster was the most consequential being he would ever meet. Nobody told him that the decision he made in the next 30 seconds would be read into the official record of the Galactic Accord 3 years later. He just saw something cold. He just saw something alone, and Marcus Webb had never, not once in 38 years, been able to look away from something that needed help. That is what this story is actually about. Not the politics, not the warships, not the emergency session of the Galactic Council that followed. It is about one man, one doorway, one choice in the chain reaction it sent across 100 star systems. Before this is over, you will understand how a species without a word for mercy was forced to build one. How the most powerful diplomatic body in the known galaxy got humbled by a man who makes soup for a living, and why opening a door might be the most dangerous, most beautiful, most stubbornly human thing we have ever done. Unit inside Exalari of the Ninth Surith had never been cold before. Her home world, a tidally locked moon called VTHKA, sits so close to its gas giant parent that the surface never drops below 23 degrees even at the poles. Her kind, the Rithni, are built for warmth. Blood thick and violet, circulated by two hearts beating alternating rhythm. Like two drummers keeping each other honest. They have no word for shivering because their biology never required one. At 2:14 in the morning on February 9th, in an alley behind a diner in Spokane, Washington, Jo was shivering so hard her secondary heart had gone into stress arrhythmia. The Galactic Accord's diplomatic mission to Earth had been running for 11 months and was by every measure the Accord used to judge these things a failure. Humans had been rated Class 3 emergent, curious, toolless, using mildly violent, biochemically interesting but otherwise unremarkable. The senior diplomat, a four-armed bureaucrat named Thresher, was supposed to spend 6 months collecting data and file a report recommending a 20-year observation extension before any real contact was formalized. What he had not accounted for was that humans are absolutely exhausting to observe neutrally. They kept doing things, unexpected things, irrational, emotionally inconvenient things that broke his data models every time he got them running cleanly. He watched a human woman sprint into a traffic to push a stranger's stroller out of the path of a truck. He watched a group of teenagers who had been mocking a crying man on a park bench suddenly, without any prompt, sit down beside him and stay there for 40 minutes. He watched a soldier in archival footage drape his own jacket over an enemy combatant in the rain. None of that fit, the models said. Emergent species at this developmental stage were tribal and hierarchical. They helped their own group and viewed outsiders with hostility. That was the pattern for 61 of the 63 species the Accord had evaluated. Humans were 64. The models kept breaking. Thresher responded the way threatened bureaucrats always respond. He got paranoid. He decided the anomalies were performance. The humans knew they were being watched. This was theater, a strategy to appear benevolent while hiding something dangerous underneath. By month 11 he was convinced humanity was either the most sophisticated deceptive species the Accord had ever encountered, or a cosmic aberration that posed an existential Threat to galactic stability just by existing, he filed for reclassification to Class 4 caution, the automated crisis. Protocol triggered and immediate. Evacuation was ordered and Thresher evacuated with the speed of a man who is not looking back. He left Joe behind. She had been running atmospheric sample collection in the city, cataloging trace biochemicals in human inhabited environments. Her communicator had a fault warning for 3 days. Nobody had fixed when the evacuation signal came. She didn't receive it. She finished her samples, packed her kit, walked to the rendezvous coordinates and found nothing but a thermal scar where the shuttle had been. They had not waited. They had not sent a second message. They had not, and this is what would later appear in the Accord's disciplinary record as Exhibit C. Even check whether she had checked in before departure. Z stood in that parking lot for 20 minutes running probability models. She calculated her atmospheric exposure limit. She inventoried her resources. 1 sample. Case 1 broken communicator. 1 emergency beacon needing a 6-hour warm-up cycle. No local currency. Vithani, do not panic. They assess and adapt. What she did not have was a warm solution. She moved to the diner's exterior wall for the radiant heat, then to the dumpster alcove when the wind picked up, folding into the smallest shape she could make, her 4-fingered hands flat against her chest plates, her secondary heart stuttering, arriving at the same answer each time. Without warmth, her biology would reach critical threshold in approximately 4 hours. Marcus Webb had worked the overnight shift at that diner called Patty's because the owner was named Patricia, and she lacked imagination in naming things but not in cooking them for 6 years. He was the kind of man cities accidentally produce steady, capable, moderately frustrated by the gap between the life he'd imagined and the one he had but not broken. He had done a stint in the army, survived a marriage that had been good then wasn't, and raised a daughter named Cora who was 11 and thought he hung the moon. He did not have money or influence or a theory of change. He had a second-hand coat, a truck with a heater that only worked on the passenger side, and a complete inability to pretend he had not seen something when he had seen it. At 217, taking out a trash bag after the last table cleared, Marcus saw the shape behind the dumpster. His first thought was homeless person, which in Spokane, February, is not a small emergency. He took 2 steps and stopped because homeless people in his experience did not have 6 limbs or the wrong number of fingers or eyes that caught the alley light and scattered it back in a color. With no name in English, he stood there. He later said 10 seconds. The security camera shows closer to 30, and he looked at this thing and it looked back with those refracted eyes shaking like something wound too tight, and Marcus made the calculation that would rewrite diplomatic history, not by calculating, by feeling the answer and knowing it was true. It was cold. It was alone. He had a warm diner 10 feet away. Come on, he said just that. Come on. Z did not speak English. She had 3 weeks of passive audio absorption, enough to parse basic directives. She understood come. She understood the open door. She understood with the precision of a species that had survived 6,000 years by correctly reading predator body language, that this biped's posture was not aggressive. She stood slowly, joints stiff, and walked into the warmth. Marcus made soup. The kitchen was still warm, and he loaded a Bowl with leftover chicken and rice set. It on the counter where the staff ate. And mind eating because that is what you do when there is a language barrier. And someone needs food, she ate not. Because she recognized chicken and rice. She didn't, but because the gesture was unambiguous and she was frightened and exhausted and had been alone in the cold for 2 hours, and something warm placed in front of her without demand or condition was the most disorienting thing she had experienced in 11 months. On this planet, while she ate, he found the foil emergency blanket in the first aid kit and draped it around her shoulders. Then he sat across from her with his coffee and waited. He didn't call anyone, didn't record her, just sat the way those teenagers had sat on the bench because the moment required presence more than action. Then mutist. Then deemed. ZH assessed him while she ate. She had 6 months of data on human behavior filtered through Thresh's paranoid lens. The lens said this was theater, that the biped had a motive building toward a request. The motive didn't appear. He refilled her water. Without being asked, he turned the heat up when her shivering didn't stop. When she tried her broken communicator for the 15th time and made a sound of frustration, he looked at the device, said, "Is that broken?" Took it with her permission, found the cracked seal on the power coupling and fixed it with thermal tape from the utility drawer. Just fixed it because something was broken and he had the tape. Z went very still. In Brethani culture, objects of value belong to your unit. If something breaks, your unit fixes it or doesn't. And the hierarchy reveals itself in which direction resources flow. She had been in Threshar's unit for 4 years. In 4 years, nothing she owned had ever been repaired by someone of higher rank. Resources flowed upward. That was how it worked. This biped had repaired her communicator while she ate his soup. She would later describe this in her formal testimony as the first time she understood that the anomalies in Threshar's data were not performance, that humans were not deceptively benevolent, they were simply benevolent. And the taxonomy her species used to categorize behavior had no bin for what she was looking at. She tried to transmit on the repaired communicator. Got nothing. The evacuation window had passed. The ship was gone. The relay out of range. Marcus watched her work through this and then quietly got up and made a second pot of coffee. You need somewhere to stay tonight. Not aggressively, not weighted with expectation, just checking, leaving the door open. His apartment was a 6-minute walk away, 3rd floor of a building where the elevator worked half the time. He lived there with a cat named Sergeant, named by Cora, who had decided at age 7 that cats should have ranks, and walls covered in drawings Cora had made at various ages, each one framed. Each frame level, Jo slept on the futon under 3 blankets and her equipment vest and slept for 5 hours, the first real sleep she'd managed in 3 weeks. In the morning, he made eggs and left for work. Before he went, he showed her the heating, showed her the bathroom, left cash on the counter with a note in large, clear capital letters explaining where the diner was. Then he left a stranger, an alien, though he understood her nature only vaguely and hadn't asked. Alone in his apartment with his cat and his daughter's drawings and everything he owned, because she was a guest and guests deserve trust. Z sat alone in that apartment for 4 hours. She did not go through his drawers or access his devices. She sat and looked at the drawings on the walls. She noted the Frames inexpensive but careful each. One level, she noted the drawings placed under a glass on the kitchen counter so they wouldn't move in 4 years with. Thresher's unit she had never seen. Care directed at something with no strategic value, the drawings could not advance his position, the cat could not provide resources, the care was simply care. The same care extended to her. Unasked in the dark of an alley, she spent those 4 hours revising everything she thought she knew. Thresher's Class 4 caution recommendation had already begun moving. Through the Accord's machinery, Class 4 triggered a cascade of automated reviews. And in the current political climate, 2 genuine Class 4 situations had destabilized 3 inhabited systems in the past decade. There was enormous pressure to act fast. Acting fast meant a quarantine designation, Earth closed to all Accord contact for 50 years. Minimum with provisions for more aggressive intervention if the evaluation was upgraded, not extinction. The Accord didn't do that. But 50 years of isolation for a developing world, combined with diplomatic exclusion and covert surveillance, were things that bent the trajectory of civilizations. Thresher filed on February 8th. ZH had been left in the alley on February 9th. The council vote was scheduled for February 17th. She had 8 days. Her communicator had a long-range emergency function that could, from sufficient elevation at the right window, reach an Accord relay satellite. She had the math, the coordinates, the equipment to boost the signal into a full testimony injection into the active council record. She could transmit from Marcus' roof. She had not done it yet because she was still rewriting. The version she had planned was a careful technical correction to Thresher's methodology, documented, persuasive, likely to delay the vote. What she sent instead was a first-person account in the formal, evidentiary language of Accord testimony of 17 hours in human space without diplomatic protection, a raw sample, and uncontrolled experiment. She wrote about the alley, the soup, the foil blanket, and the fixed communicator, the apartment and the cat, and the drawings on the walls, each one level in its inexpensive frame. She submitted it as a counter-recommendation against Class 4 caution, citing direct observational evidence of anomalous benevolence behaviors extrapolated from a non-diplomatic encounter with a single individual of no elevated social standing. Then she climbed down from the roof and asked Marcus what sergeant meant. He explained, military rank. Long story, his daughter's idea. Joe processed this, a domestic animal holding a military title assigned by child, maintained by an adult, not because it was logical but because the child had thought it was funny and the adult thought everything the child thought was worth preserving. She had to sit down. Are you okay? Marcus asked. I am reassessing something, she said. Okay, said Marcus. You want coffee while you do that? The council session on February 17th ran 5 hours and 11 minutes. Joe's testimony was read into the record by the presiding officer, a 700-year-old collective intelligence named Varesh, who had overseen the admission of 49 species and was not known for visible emotional response. Varesh paused for 11 seconds after reading the section about the communicator repair. Then it read the part about the drawings on the wall. Thresher spent most of the session making procedural objections. Joe's Testimony was contaminated by survival. Stress, the benevolence was contextual. One human one night, one alley was not. A data set, VORs called for. Supplementary review of all anomalous. Behavioral data, Thresher had logged in. Discounted, the Sauterses' jacket, the woman in traffic, the teenagers on the bench, 61 incidents coded performance. Likely and buried. The supplementary. Analyst presented a coherent pattern. Not isolated events, not theater, but a species-level behavioral signature. Consistent across geographic regions, class divisions, age groups, and cultural contexts. Humans help not just their own people, not when there was something in it for them, in alleys. At 2:00 in the morning when the thing they were helping didn't look like them and had no way to reciprocate, they helped the way you breathe because not helping required more conscious effort than helping did. The vote on Class 4. Caution failed 11-3. Thrashikar was quietly recommended for reassignment, which in accord language means what you think it means. The motion that passed designated Humanity Class 3 emergent, with an expedited review track and a notation unused in accord records for 140 years. Anomalous altruism. Species-wide origin undetermined. Recommend extended observation with priority interest designation. What it meant as VORs clarified after the vote was, these people are something we have not seen before. Watch carefully, do not frighten them, and do not close the door. Marcus found out on a Tuesday afternoon, 14 months later, when Z came back not alone with a diplomatic team, proper credentials, a translation apparatus. She sat in the same stool at Patty's counter and told him everything, the testimony, the vote, the notation, what it all meant. Marcus drank his coffee. The soup, he said finally, that was the big thing, the soup. The communicator was the pivot point, Joe said, though. The soup was noted. He turned his mug. His hands, you got left out in the cold. By your own people, yes, and you're the one who went to bat for us. Joe considered how to explain what had happened to her in that apartment. Sitting with Sargent, staring at the drawings, the realization she was still working through, and thought she might be working through for some time. You showed me something I did not have a word for, she said, and now you do. We are still building it. It is not a short word. Patty refilled both cups without being asked, the way she always did. Asked if his friend wanted anything, and Joe said she would very much like the soup. Marcus sat across from the being from another world in a diner in Spokane on a Tuesday, and felt without entirely understanding why, like something enormous and correct had just clicked into place. Here is what I want you to take from this. The Galactic Accord had evaluated 63 species before us, 63 civilizations that climbed out of caves, built tools, made fire, and looked up to ask what else was out there. In all 63, the pattern held: help your own first, treat outsiders as threats or assets, build walls and hierarchies, optimize for survival. And then there was 64, making soup, fixing things because something was broken and you had the tape, framing drawings at $5 a frame because a child made them and the child matters, sitting down on the bench because someone was sad and you were there. There is no evolutionary advantage to placing your jacket on an enemy in the rain, no strategic return on sprinting into traffic for a stranger's stroller, no resource logic behind Marcus Webb holding a door for something he had never seen and making its soup when it came inside. There is only this. We looked at something cold and alone and could not look away. That impulse, irrational, unselected for, persistent across 6,000 years and every culture that ever existed, might be the strangest and most powerful thing about us. Not our technology, not our violence, not our art. The thing that made an ancient collective intelligence pause for 11 seconds in a diplomatic session was the same thing that makes you hold the elevator for a stranger, cover a sleeping person on a bus, hand back what someone dropped without waiting to be asked. We help not because we are required to, not because anyone is watching, because something deep in us finds the alternative unacceptable. That is the whole story. Varesh used the word anomalous because it was the correct scientific term, but Marcus Webb, who still works at Patty's and has turned down most of what they have offered him because Cora is 12 and Spokane is where she is, would tell you it isn't anomalous at all. It is just what you do. Notation is still active. The review is ongoing. And somewhere in a Brethany research station, on a wall of pale alien material, there is a framed child's drawing, a crayon cat in a military hat, signed an 11-year-old handwriting. Cora drew it and asked ZH to take it because she thought ZH should have something of home wherever she was going. Z didn't have a word for that either. She is working on